So this is Nettles. If you're on Jim McDonald's walk, you still here, Jim? So he talked a lot about it. I'm just going to cover a few uses so we can see a few plants. So this is Urtica dioica. Urtica means to, thank you. Urtica means to burn, and it's the same root word as urea. And so you're thinking the guy who named urine, so urine means to burn. So the first person to name it must have had a urinary tract infection, right? Because it's like it burns. It burns? You ever thought about that? Like why urine is not? Probably not. It's just weird to burn. So I mean, I guess if you had a urinary tract infection, it was a little bit pre-syphilis, so it wasn't that. So when they named it. So that's what urtica means to burn. Dioica means that there's male and female flowers on separate plants, which is not always true with this plant. But that's what some people say dioica means of two houses, but what it really means is male and female flowers on separate plants. It's in the Urticaceae, a family with some stinging plants and some non-stinging plants. This one is not particularly stinging. These are the flowers that are now going to seed, and I like the seeds for medicine. And I'll talk about a few parts, but probably not too long. A lot of you will like it. It's the brown, not the green, but the brown specks in my hands, that's the seeds. And I guess I want to start off by saying that a lot of people say that you can't use nettles after it goes to seed, and I don't agree with that. I use it all the time after it goes to seed, including the leaves. But I think they're a little higher in silica. So when you drink them after they go to seed, if you drink the leaves, you can definitely, sometimes it can be a little more astringent and a little bit rougher. That's the silica in it. But I think you could still use them. I mean, they taste much better before they go to seed. But for medicine, I definitely use them sometimes after they go to seed. It's one of these plants that's incredibly useful because the leaves are a good medicine. I'm just assuming lots of folks use nettles, and it's easy to find information out. So the leaves are a good diuretic. The seeds make a great gamasio. So you know how you make gamasio with sesame seeds and salt? You can look up on it. Just use nettle seed to have a slightly better, slightly not as good tasting gamasio, but it's cooler, right? Nettle seed gamasio. So, or gamasio if you like. So we have here is we have the leaves, which are a pretty good diuretic. They're nutritious, but I have to say that lots of people say they're higher in this and that than other plants. The literature does not support that. I think they're definitely nutritious, and they definitely straddle medicine and food, right? But there's lots of plants that are very nutritious, but these are nice because they're wild, easy to gather, and they have a certain panache to them. You know, you gathered the stinging nettles. You barehanded maybe. So leaves, diuretic, nutritious, seeds rich in oils. And so where people go crazy for hemp, I'm not the craziest for hemp. I mean, I'm glad it's becoming legal. Yeah, it's just another plant to me. It's just another plant, you know, it's like all this focus on marijuana, just another plant, right? And it's way too much focus on it. What's crazy, of course, is that people go to jail for using it. I'm not a user, obviously. So, but I wish they put some research, that all this research into marijuana, we put some research into nettles, right? And because the nettles are perennial as opposed to annual, and the seeds are super rich in oils. And I don't really know what the composition is, if they're rich in GLAs or ganolinoleic acids, but I like to eat the seeds. They're a little bit astringent. So that's the seeds as a food. And the root is one of the better prostate diuretics. It's really just a good diuretic. But the root of nettles, these things, like there's a bunch of nettles somewhere. That's a big blackberry root. Fine. Nettle spreads underground. And the roots, there's two parts. There's this part that spreads and the part that goes down. The part that spreads is called the stolon. And the stolons and roots, the underground structures of nettles, can help a little bit with BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia, and also prostatitis. So there's a lot of complications that I'm not going to get into here. Not prostate cancer, right? Prostate cancer is a whole other deal. So BPH is basically a kind of a hormonal swelling of the prostate that happens to pretty much anybody who has a prostate by the time they're 50, 60, 70, and it just affects them differently. Prostatitis is an infection of the prostate that causes inflammation. You have to kill the infective organism. This doesn't do that. What this does is the roots of this plant reduce some of the swelling and maybe some of the BPH, so you just pee better. which for men can be very problematic as they age and as the prostate squeezes around the urethra. Does that make any sense? So I'm saying, if you work in with men or anybody with a prostate, and they start to have prostate problems, and it's not prostate cancer, along with saw palmetto, definitely add Nettles root. The literature is great on it. It's non-harmful. It's locally abundant. It's easy to make. You can make it out of tincture. You can make a tea out of it. The tea is a little bit better. You have to learn how to work with diuresis at night, because what happens is one of the problems when you have prostate swelling is men have to get up 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a night. Poor quality sleep, less healing. You have this feed forward, from lacking sleep. Does that make sense? So if you're going to give people, make sure you don't give it to them right before they go to sleep, but a couple of hours before they go to sleep. So what can you do with Nettles root? Yes. What can you do with Nettles root? Prostatitis and BPH. It's probably a diuretic. The leaf is diuretic too. The root's a little stronger. And of course, the last thing is the stems are rich in bast fibers. So bast fibers are one of the many kinds of fibers that plants use to give them structural. Am I understandable? Yeah. So am I talking too fast? Am I a little too New York accenty for you? Yeah, all right. Good, thanks. I was going to say something. You said something different. So this is a hori-hori. Chad, are you here? Chad's gone. So this is a hori-hori. It is my favorite digging tool, and Chad is selling them for 20 bucks at his booth, and they cost usually about 25 bucks with shipping, and this is the best. So I am promoting my friend's stuff, but not because this is just a great tool, and he has them just cheaply here. My students have to have one. So you can buy it anywhere, but if you're a wildcrafter, the two main tools, a good pair of pruners and a hori-hori. Because most plants, you don't need shovels. You just need a hori-hori to dig right underneath the soil to get your rhizomes. So really, you don't buy it anywhere, but they're just cheap here if you don't live far away. So I'm just using my hori-hori totally inappropriately. The nice thing about these, though, is that they don't break easy. I play with this all the time. So this is not going to work great because the plant, when it's dried, it works better. And there's all these little fibers that come off the end. I'm never patient enough. Doug Elliott can probably do this much better. Doug's right over here. Doug, you got a secret for debast fibering this? Okay, thanks. I feel a little better. Nettle uniforms. I've had Nettle socks. So it's not really easy right now, but the fibers that run right in, when they're dry, they work better. But you can see them on the ends. It's not that green part I took off. That's the outer, that's the bark. It's these fibers right here, and they twine into something right there. Those things make a good rope. But so I think it's a lot. We can go on forever with nettles, but so you got leaves as nutrition and a diuretic. You got seeds which are nutritional, and I think are rich in oils. You have the root, which is a prostate remedy, and just another diuretic. And then the fibers running up and down it. There's many other things you can do with nettles, but it's a good beginning. You probably already know this, but as soon as it hits hot water, the sting goes away. But the question that a lot of us discuss is that in the stinger, what happens with nettles stingers is they're basically modified hairs. And within the hair, you have a chemical mixture. That's the thing that stings. Basically what happens is the hair goes into you and it breaks and it injects the fluid. That's why when it hits hot water, it doesn't work, because the stinger is flaccid, right? Just to use that word like that. So there's no way for it to penetrate. Hi, Mom. So she's used to all this kind of talk from me. But that's really what happens. Basically, it's just weak. It has to go into you and break and inject. But the interesting thing is two of the components in that are serotonin and acetylcholine. And when I say serotonin and acetylcholine, I don't mean serotonin-like and acetylcholine-like. Those two proteins are in that mixture. So there's a question of some people saying to sting themselves and feel good. And if you want, you can go to the website called urtication.com, which I didn't send you to. And you can see what people do with nettles. But some people feel like you can potentially I don't think so at all. But you can potentially get serotonin and acetylcholine, major neurotransmitter, serotonin a lot in the brain. There's lots of serotonin in the gut in order to kind of activate your neural signaling. But so it's just interesting. What really happens for most times, by the way, is when you take a protein like serotonin and acetylcholine and you eat them, like in bananas are very rich in serotonin, is your body breaks the serotonin up into basic amino acids and then rebuilds them for what you need, rather than just taking it and serotonin going into your bloodstream. You get amino acids. But on the other hand, the thing about nettles is if you're stinging yourself, it's kind of going in directly and bypassing digestion, so maybe a wholer form. Does that make sense at all?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Does that make sense to you? No? How about you?
Mm-hmm.
All right, great.
Have you ever heard the thing where if you get stung by a nettle, you eat a leaf and it should get rid of the sting?
I don't think so. No. It's really sometimes hard to get rid of the sting. Sometimes it just lasts. I don't think anything internal would stop the itchiness, because it's local irritation. It's a counter-irritant, and it's bringing blood to the surface. There's a whole other use, nettles as a rubefacient or a counter-irritant, bringing blood to the surface of your skin, which is why for some people's arthritis, it's going to be a little bit helpful. If you take arthritis, which is kind of a crazy word because arthritis just means joints hurt, right? It's not what it means. It means swollen joints. But the word is used very easily. And if somebody has arthritis, there's two ways to divide arthritises: colder arthritises and hotter arthritises. And with your colder arthritises, kind of very stiff and not a lot of feeling, and it aches, but it's not sharp and painful. Your hot arthritis is red, painful, very acute. You would use your nettles for your colder arthritises to increase blood flow to the area. Does that make sense, that part of it? So it's just one way of thinking about, because hot and cold don't really exist that way. I mean, your body temperature has not changed, but yet hot and cold are metaphors for kind of slow and pale versus kind of very active and red. Yes?
What would you use for hot?
There's a lot of things, but you would want to cool it down. So instead of going into a whole arthritis, with arthritises, it's very constitutional in general, unless it's damage from like skateboard injuries, right? Somebody skateboard past 25 years old, and all of a sudden all their knees and all the falling and everything just starts to get very arthritic and hot. Anything else? So I was just trying to put myself into getting a little skateboard cred, which So where I take all my students in rural South Ohio, there's a big skateboard park just like a half mile. And the one thing I learned watching the skateboard park is he or she who does not feel pain becomes a skateboarder. Because it's just falling, yes, falling. You have to, if you're sensitive to pain, like you're out in the beginning. So Nettles, let's walk on.